Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. So happy to have with us today, but also thinking a little bit about tomorrow. Tomorrow, y'all, I'm so excited. We're going to have a really fun announcement. We're going to make a big deal about it on tomorrow's show. Great chance for us. So we've been asking, hey, when we get back together again, we're going to do anything sort of DawgNation Days of Summer-themed stuff here in the upcoming season? Well, guess what? We got some big stuff about to go down. I'm going to tell you about that tomorrow. So please make sure you're part of tomorrow's show. Big show for us today as well. Terence Edwards stopping by. We'll continue our look at those who might be first-round picks for Georgia in the 2022 draft as a way of saying, does Georgia have enough of this type of talent to really be on the shortest of short list, top of the list for potential national championships? We'll do that on the program today. Special look at the running back spot here today. And I think the actual discussion about running backs is really pretty interesting all the way around. So we'll do that off the very top of the program today. So glad to have you with us as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I think in some respects, the situation for Georgia at running back is almost exactly the way that he would expect it to be for UGA, but also maybe diving deeper, a little different than maybe some people have imagined about this position for Georgia upcoming this season. We're going to talk about that right now as a continuation of what we've been doing here over the course of the last few days. What we said on the heels of last week's NFL draft was, it seems fairly obvious there's a strong correlation right now between the teams that win national championships and also the teams that produce the most first-round draft picks. Georgia obviously produced a lot of draft picks overall, set a program record with 9 last weekend, but maybe could do more in terms of producing those Thursday night picks, those first-round picks, as a way of really giving itself the best chance of winning a national championship. Now, the great news from a Georgia perspective, and if you're long-time plugged-in UGA fan, you would certainly expect this to be true, is there are plenty of potential candidates on the current roster to maybe be that for next year. And as a lot of these early mock drafts come out, you already start to see a lot of Georgia names sprinkled in. It's probably fair to say that no Georgia player shows up on all the mock drafts, but a handful of Georgia players at least show up on some of them. There are plenty of candidates who could be first-round picks for Georgia here in 2022 and could help Georgia along the way to hopefully winning a national championship in 2021. So what we've done here for the last couple of days is look at a couple of position groups in particular. We started with quarterback, always a good position to start with, and while JT Daniels, Georgia starting quarterback, isn't a probably shoe-in lock to be a first-round pick this upcoming year. There are some mock drafts that are already out that don't have him listed in the first round. He clearly is a prime candidate to have a big season and do so, and it's not hard to imagine how he could get there. FoxSports.com, after all, had him as like the number 1 overall pick. Opinions vary on this kind of stuff. The one thing we said for Daniels is that if you want to take that next step and move your way into the first-round discussion, the one thing that Daniels probably needs to do more of in comparison to other quarterbacks who've been first-round type guys, who've been Heisman finalists, who put their team in the playoff conversation, he probably needs to throw more touchdowns. That kind of makes sense. You can go a long way as a quarterback by taking what the defense gives you, but at a certain point in time, the best quarterbacks also find a way to take what the defense is trying not to give them, and that's what leads to touchdowns, and that's kind of the next step for JT Daniels. We'll see if he takes that. Yesterday, we talked about the wide receiver position. What we said was, if George Pickens is healthy and playing, that's an obvious name that you could clearly pencil in as a likely first-round pick, and it comes easy to imagine that taking place. The Pickens situation, though, is clouded by injury right now, and so with Pickens kind of, at least for the sake of conversation, pushed to the side for the moment, who are those other guys that could emerge? You probably need 2 of them at least. That's what recent national champions have kind of had. And what I said was yesterday is I'm not quite so sure who those 2 names are going to be, but I am glad there are a lot of candidates on the Georgia roster to potentially be there. It's easy to maybe say Jermaine Burton. He showed you some flashes last year. It's certainly hopeful to say guys like Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint and Dominic Blaylock coming back from injury, and we'll see how that goes. Then you get to like the Demetrius Roberts Robertsons, the Adonai Mitchells, and, the actual recruiting rankings of the Georgia receivers right now actually fares pretty well, even to the very best programs in college football, maybe better than some fans realize. So we don't quite know who the guys who could emerge are going to be, but there are certainly plenty of names who kind of stand as a possibility there to give Georgia the kind of wide receiver situation that recent national champions have had, very active on the first round of the NFL draft with those kinds of names. Now, with all that said, let's move on to the next position group here. Let's talk running back here for a moment. Now, when it comes to the first round of the NFL draft as a possible prediction for, who's going to win a national championship, this all gets really interesting, and many of you are very well aware of this. When I was a kid growing up, running back was kind of the glamour position in football. It was certainly the glamour position in college football. The biggest names in the sport seem to be running backs. That's not really the case as much anymore. If you look at the last 3 NFL drafts, which has commonly been what we've been doing as we've been going through this discussion over the last few days, it's kind of interesting. It's a pretty good snapshot of just what football has become. There have only been 4 running backs taken in the first round of the last 3 NFL drafts. You may be aware of that. What you may also be aware of is that while the running back spot is becoming less vogue with these first-round selections, the 4 running backs that have been taken in the first round of the last 3 years were all running backs that won a national championship during their time at college. So overall, running back is less a part of the first round of the NFL draft than it used to be. But the running backs who do seem to find their way into the first round of the NFL draft, the running backs that do seem to have their name called there are also running backs that seem to have played a hand in leading their team to a national championship in some form or fashion as well, and I think that's kind of interesting. Now, I've already gotten a couple of tweets from you kind of thinking that the running back spot was going to come up today. It was mentioned to me that when you see a lot of these discussions about first-round picks for Georgia, the names that you don't see coming up right now are the names of the Georgia running backs. Guys like James Cook and Zamir White, guys who are draft eligible for this upcoming season. You don't really see their names showing up in the early mock drafts in the first round. For instance, there was a long list at Athlon Sports of potential SEC names who could be taken in the first round of the NFL draft, and Zamir White, James Cook, their names were nowhere to be found on this discussion. So you might be left to say, well, I guess that means that the Georgia running back spot is not necessarily going to be a strong contributor to the national championship formula for Georgia this year, just given the fact that we've talked so much about first-round picks being kind of a precursor to all of this. And I understand where you're coming from on that, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. It is true that right now that White and Cook don't seem to be in the same category. Kendall Milton younger, Kenny McIntosh younger, Dajon Edwards younger, guys kind of in that same vein. They don't seem to be in the same category right now of the very best running backs we've talked about the last couple of years. But that doesn't mean that couldn't change here this upcoming season, because on the one hand, while I want to be realistic and tell you the truth about what's being said out there, I also want to give you some hope and some optimism as well. And frankly, I don't think you have to reach very far to find this. So let me kind of run through this here a little bit. I have 5 reasons that why, even though guys like Zamir White, James Cook don't show up in early mock drafts as potential first-round picks for 2022 right now, there is still a chance that the Georgia running back situation overall that includes White and Cook could still be very much a part of the national championship formula. I'm going to try to run through these 5 here fairly quick here, but these are the 5 reasons that Georgia fans ought to be optimistic about the running backs here this year for Georgia. Let me start with this. By virtue of recruiting rankings, if you take the 24/7 Sports composite player rating for each of the Georgia running backs, and if you add it together, Georgia actually has, by basis of recruiting ranking, the most talented running back room in the entire country. So if Georgia has a problem at the running back spot right now, then pretty much everybody else has the same problem, because at least on the basis of recruiting rankings, no one has collected a more talented running back room than what Georgia has, and obviously we'll have more on that coming up in a moment. So that's your first reason to be optimistic about Georgia running back. From a sheer talent perspective, as measured by recruiting rankings, Georgia's got the number 1 room in the entire country. Here's the second thing. Let's look at Zamir White in particular on this. There's this belief out there, and you kind of understand where some of this comes from a little bit, that Zamir, while a very good running back, may be somewhat still kind of dealing with a couple of knee injuries that he's dealt with, and maybe less explosive than some recent Georgia running backs have been, especially if you compare him to the greats like Todd Gurley and Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel, that maybe Zamir White is a little less explosive than those guys. And one of the things that gets kind of pointed out here is the average yards per carry, as a for instance on this, a way in which Zamir White maybe not quite as explosive as some recent Georgia running backs have been, and that's all fair. We'll add that into this discussion here. But let me give you room for optimism on this. That White, who last year averaged 5.41 yards per carry on his way to 779 yards, you know that Najee Harris last year for Alabama only averaged 5.84 yards per carry on his way to 1,466 yards rushing. He was a first-round pick, but on a yards per carry basis, he really didn't tote the rock much better than what Zamir White did. What ended up happening is because Alabama had these big leads in the fourth quarter, things like that, all of a sudden Najee just got a lot more carries. He had a 251 carries last year to Zamir White's 144. But if you're concerned about Zamir White because his yards per carry number last year was a little smaller, a little lesser than some Georgia running backs have been in recent years, the fact of the matter is Najee Harris was only slightly better a number than that, and he still used that yards per carry mark to the tune of nearly 1,500 yards rushing. So that's the second reason to feel optimistic about the Georgia running back situation here this year. Here's reason number 3. When you see these running backs that are taken in the first round, guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Travis Etienne from Clemson, one of the things you see is, in addition to being really good running backs, of course, they are also dynamic weapons in the passing game there as well. And I'd say overall, even though we saw a lot more of this at G-Day, overall, that's not really thought to be the hallmark of the Georgia running backs necessarily. James Cook a little bit, and we'll have more on that in just a bit. But the overall profile of the Georgia running back room is not necessarily seasoned pass catchers, at least as of yet. But here's another reason for optimism for these Georgia running backs here this season. While Travis Etienne became a big part of the Clemson passing offense in 2019 and 2020, the most recent season, if you want to go back to the year in which Etienne was a part of the national championship at Clemson in 2018, he ran the ball for nearly 1,700 yards, 1,658 to be specific, but only had 78 receiving yards there that year. You can still be a big-time running back and a big-time contributor to a national championship team and maybe even eventually a first-round pick by doing a lot more running than passing right now. Yes, NFL teams are still looking for that passing attack, but Etienne in 2018 was a huge part of the national championship formula for the Tigers, and he was not really yet a passing game threat there when it comes to that. Here's the fourth reason that you can be optimistic about the Georgia running game here for this upcoming year. While you look at the overall stats for Zamir White and James Cook and Kenny McIntosh and Kendall Milton, you add Daijun Edwards in that discussion there as well, it would seem to be obvious that we haven't quite yet seen that superstar emerge onto the scene yet, that household name that everybody in college football kind of knows about. And because it did not happen in 2020, you may be left to assume, well, the same thing's going to happen in 2021 there as well. And this Georgia running back room may just not quite have a superstar here this season. That's certainly a possibility that might be the case. But let's look at another running back who's been taken in the first round of the NFL draft here over the course of the last couple of years. Let's look at Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was taken in the first round of the 2020 NFL draft. Obviously, the year that put him in that discussion was his final year at LSU in 2019, where he goes like 1,414 yards rushing, was also a big part of the passing game and everything like that. But the idea that Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a first-round level running back and the kind of guy that everybody in college football knew about, the idea that would be true in 2019 based on what he did in 2018, I'm sorry, no one would have been talking about that. Edwards-Helaire for LSU in 2018 only had 658 yards rushing, less than some of the Georgia running backs that we're talking about here right now. He emerged as a first-round candidate and a contributor to a national championship based on what he did in his final season at LSU. And obviously, I would never guarantee the same thing is going to happen for one of these Georgia running backs right now, but I would certainly suggest it is a possibility based on the way that Edwards-Helaire exploded once he started playing and a better offense all the way around. Then finally, there's this. Let's say that Georgia doesn't have a superstar emerge, the way that Etienne was from the word go at his time at Clemson, the way that Najee Harris grew into that role for Alabama, finally culminating what he did in 2020, and Edwards-Helaire, who I just mentioned right now. Let's say that doesn't happen for Georgia. They don't quite have that same superstar level of running back, the kind of guys that we've seen in this program over the course of the last few years. even that is not necessarily the end of the discussion for Georgia having a running game that contributes to the national championship formula. If you were to go back to 2017, as a for instance, that was the year in which Josh Jacobs was a part of the Alabama roster. He was a first-round pick a couple years after that. That running game didn't really have much of a superstar there either. Damian Harris was a 1,000-yard rusher, but he had like 1,000 on the nose. Not the big, huge totals the way we're talking about right now. And, beyond that, it was Bo Scarborough contributing a little bit. It was Najee Harris as a freshman contributing a little bit. Josh Jacobs as a sophomore, not quite yet the first-round pick that he would become. They also had Jalen Hurts running the ball a lot that year, but we'll subtract that out of this discussion because that's not really what Georgia brings to the table for this upcoming season. But as recently as 2017, we see a national championship running game that was powered by an eventual first-round pick in kind of a supporting role, but a lot of other guys in kind of a complementary role adding together to equal something that was pretty potent. So here's the bottom line on this entire discussion. I don't yet know how good the Georgia running game is going to appear and how much this will look like what Alabama did when it rushed the football in 2020, LSU the year before that, the national championship team of Clemson the year before that. But I think there are at least 5 reasons, there may be 10, but there are at least 5 reasons to be optimistic about the Georgia rushing attack for this upcoming season. That a group that was pretty good a year ago might take an even bigger step here in 2021 because they're playing an offense that's a lot more potent all the way around. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Meriwether and Tharp, and glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are just really happy to have you a part of the program today, and we extend a huge, huge debt of gratitude to our friends at Meriwether and Tharp for making it all possible. Meriwether and Tharp's your source for Georgia divorce. What that means is they've been through situations like this thousands of times before. They know the backstory, the intricacies of the law, the experiences related to all of this, and more important than that, they also know how it feels to go through this. Because for you, there are feelings attached to this, right? And they're not all positive. We certainly understand that. And Meriwether and Tharp understands that there as well. So sensitive to your feelings as you go through this, but armed with the knowledge that you need to make it the best for you, to win through this process and be made whole again with your finances and your relationship with your family and children and everything else that goes along with that. That is what Meriwether and Tharp does for you. In fact, so much of this is done before you even make the decision to put them to work for you. They're going to offer you a free initial consultation. They'll give you free blog posts and podcasts that I think can be, of service because it kind of helps inform you about the questions that you should ask when you get involved in a discussion like this. So please make sure you check them out today. It's the AtlantaDivorceTeam.com. It's the AtlantaDivorceTeam.com. It'll get you in touch with Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Love Bob and Ashley Tharp and the whole Meriwether and Tharp team. A lot of dog fans there. A lot of folks who have been good friends of ours here at Dog Nation for a long time. So please make sure you check them out. All right, it is Terence Edwards coming up in a couple of minutes. We'll also, before we're done here today, announce our latest Kroger 5-star mom giveaway. This is going to be a really fun one today. We'll do that coming up a little bit. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse. And I want to keep the running back conversation going here for a moment because a couple of weeks ago on the show, we were very lucky to have Robert Edwards. And we'll have Terence, Robert's brother, here in a moment. But we had Robert Edwards on the show a couple of weeks ago. And if you kind of want to know what a former great running back, and by the way, go back and look at the numbers that Robert Edwards put up as a rookie for the New England Patriots. This was a guy, prior to obviously what was just an awful injury story, was a terrific running back. And we'll kind of go down, and we need to make sure we do our part to remember just how good of a back that Robert was during his career, both at Georgia and, as a rookie there in the NFL. But the point is, Robert, who got a chance to watch practice and got a chance to see these running backs closely, if you don't believe what I just said, that there are reasons for optimism that this group can be a part of a national championship formula for UGA here this year, a guy who knows the position well told us on DawgNation Daily a couple of weeks ago that he sees a lot of talent when he looks at that Georgia running back room.
You got Zamir White, who's going to be that bell cow type of running back, and then you got James Cook, who can also run in between the tackles, but he's more effective outside the box. And then you got Kendall Miller, who's a kind of a combination of both of those guys. I mean, they got a loaded backfield.
Yeah, so loaded backfield all the way around. But there was something else that Edwards said in particular when he joined the show a couple of weeks ago that I think it's important to point out here, is that for an offensive coordinator like Todd Monken, who we think can do some big things for Georgia here in year two, a guy that's got a lot of creativity, One of the weapons in that running back room that maybe the country doesn't know enough about right now, but maybe could find out a lot more about, is a guy like James Cook. As we said before, you look at, Travis Etienne, the way that he became a passing game weapon for Clemson. Certainly Clyde Edwards-Helaire was doing that there as well. The way these guys did that, one of the guys that you think, might have a chance to do some of that for Georgia in this running back conversation is a guy like James Cook, probably the most polished receiver of the Georgia running back room right now. And this is good stuff from Robert Edwards, talking about the ways in which he thinks that Cook can be used. Let's take a listen to this.
I think you got to ride the hot hand. The hot hand's going to be that guy who feel like I want to outplay my teammate who sits in the room with me. So I think it's going to be a lot of 20 personnel. I think they're going to utilize these guys' talent. I think you're going to see a lot of Zamir and James Cook on the field at the same time. Maybe one of them go in motion that takes the linebacker out of the box and try to get one-on-one matchup, mismatches. Cook's a mismatch for a linebacker anywhere on the field.
So, listen, I think that's a really well-said thing. A mismatch is James Cook, possibly on the field with other Georgia running backs at the same time, as Edwards calls it, the 20 personnel there. That is a fun thing to be able to think about. Really good stuff from Robert Edwards. We're going to get Robert's brother Terence here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, I want to talk to you about a really brand new sponsor that we're welcoming into a DawgNation Daily here today, and this is one that I'm really, really excited about. This time of year, you spend a lot of time outside, and you want a beverage that kind of goes along with that. Well, that's what I found in the Long Drink, and I want to make sure that you know all about this. This is a drink that comes from Finland. It comes ready to drink. You just pull it out, open the can, and you're ready to go. It tastes great. There are all kinds of great, flavors and varieties of the Long Drink. This is something that was founded in Finland back in 1952 when the Summer Games were in Helsinki, and then came to the United States, New York. I think it was 2018 when it first came here. I've kind of heard about this word of mouth over the course of the last few months. It's a big deal in the bars in Athens right now. Everybody seems to be loving that there. Also, a lot of the golf courses in and around where I live, people seem to be really enjoying that there. As I said before, it's great flavor. There are a lot of varieties. The traditional is the one that I like. It's got like a citrus flavor with a pretty nice little liquor kick going on with that there. As I said before, you just pull it out, open the can, it's ready to drink, you're ready to go. They also have a Long Drink Zero option there as well. They have the strong option, which includes 8.5% alcohol by volume, which is a really cool thing, and the cranberry version there as well, which a lot of those students over there in UGA are really enjoying there as well. So lots of different varieties, really, really good stuff. If you have not tried this yet, this is a great time of year to be trying that, and a great, great, great way to enjoy the spring and the summer and everything else that's going on with that. So let me give you a website to go to so you can learn more about this, find out where you can pick it up. It is available kind of all over the place right now, but you want to educate yourself about where this is available. It's thelongdrink.com. That's thelongdrink.com. It comes from Finland. It's been here in the States for a couple of years, and now it's here in the state of Georgia, all over the place. So try this. I think you'll like it as much as I do, whether you go with the original with the citrus flavor, or the cranberry flavor, or the Long Drink Zero. Whatever your choice, your option is, the one you think you'd like the best, I promise you're going to really enjoy as we head through the spring and summer here. So check out thelongdrink.com for a lot more on that. Thelongdrink.com. This is going to be a good time here this summer, drinking a bunch of Long Drink. That's going to be a lot of fun. All right. It's Kroger 5-Star Mom before we're done here today. Also, very bold talk about from one of the SEC coaches about Alabama coach Nick Saban. This is fun before we're done here today, too. But for now, on everything going on with UGA, let's talk to the great former Georgia wide receiver, Terence Edwards, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Glad to have you with us as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Well, say hello to Terence Edwards here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Glad to have him with us, and of course, as I said before, all of you with us there as well. Terence, thanks for being on the show. Hope you're doing well today, and I certainly appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks for having me, B.A. I'm doing well.
So one of the things we've been doing the show a lot this last little bit is talking about some of these Georgia guys from the 2021 roster who could be, big names for the 2022 NFL draft. But before we get there on that, the last time we talked to you, the draft had not yet occurred. We talked to you a week ago, and then the first round began that night. So looking back on the 9 Bulldogs that were selected, what's your impression of the Georgia guys that now move on to the next level? What was your big takeaway from the draft?
I think Aziz going in the second round was a little shocking to me. I think I read where some of his medical got flagged, and maybe that was the reason he dropped to the second round. But, I just think for all these guys, it doesn't matter where you get drafted, it's a dream come true. I think all these guys have been playing football all their lives and dreaming about when your name get called for the NFL draft, and now it doesn't matter where you got drafted. Now you have to go and put in the work and live out this dream. And I don't think those guys think by just getting drafted they made it. I think they're going to try to go in and make an impact, because I think that's how Kirby coaches his guys to think.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And, my takeaway from watching this, and you mentioned Ojulari, and you think about some of these other guys there as well, it almost seems like, and this is probably a little bit of an oversimplification, but it almost seems like that you can be doubted as a player by a scout and still be fine. But if you have any doubts whatsoever that creep in from the medical guys, the doctors, things like that, that can really be a hard thing to overcome in this pre-draft process. That it's almost better to be criticized for your on-field abilities as a player than it is to be criticized for your current health situation. It just seems like NFL teams get really scared away by some of that kind of stuff.
Oh, most definitely. I can remember when I was coming out, and I had my shoulder injury. If you remember, I missed the Auburn game because I popped my shoulder out of place. So I had to go back to medical recheck. Man, they pull and pry and they do all the things just because they're going to invest this type of money in you. You can't be damaged good. So you got to go in and with a clean bill of health, and if not, you will get red flagged and moved down the draft board because of your prior injury. So, that's part of it, and that's part of football.
So let me be selfish here for a moment. I'll totally acknowledge this is a selfish question. For someone like George Pickens, who's obviously coming back from an ACL injury, on the one hand, some people might say, hey, why risk further injury by coming back and playing? But on the other hand, there's this thought of, well, if you've got doubters because of your injury status, maybe you should come back and show folks how healthy you are. Now, Terence, once again, I'm obviously saying that because I want Pickens to come back and help Georgia here this year, and certainly he needs to do what's right for him. But is there a reasonable line of thought that maybe coming back and proving that you are healthy helps kind of shut up some of these doubters who may be asking questions about an injured knee?
No, let me take this question from a player perspective,
please.
Now I'm a fan, and a fan perspective. As a player, if this was like my brother or someone that I'm close to, I would definitely reevaluate the situation just to see how his knee feels in early August. If it's not 100% and you have a first-round grade, which I think he probably will have a first or second-round grade, I love my Bulldogs. I love my brothers. And most guys in that locker room would tell him to hold out, sit out, go make your money.
Yeah.
This is something you've been dreaming about all your life. I know that's something the fans don't want to hear. As a fan now, I don't want to hear it because I want the best players on the field. But just from a player perspective, I just think everyone got to realize this is something that can cost them money, and I know fans don't want to hear that part. It's about the Georgia Bulldogs, but at the end of the day, it's about he's a brand. He has to look out for himself. He has to look out for his family situation.
Sure.
So from that perspective, I probably, just depending on what my knee looks like, I probably wouldn't play. I would try. Me, personally, I would try my best to play because I just love football that much, but I can understand if he sat out for the remainder of the season. But from a fan perspective, and from, like you said, I would love to see him get back and try to help the Bulldogs capture their first national championship in 30-plus years. So two different perspectives, but neither one is wrong, but I would tend to lean more on the player perspective because I was a player.
I think I think everything you're saying there is 100% fair, and I'm glad that you did take that as the perspective of a player, because that is the kind of thing that we do need to hear on this show in situations like that. One of the things we've talked about over the course of the last few days is, hey, these national champions are producing half-dozen first-round picks. These are programs that are loaded with future NFL stars, and we're looking at the 2022 draft off the 2021 Georgia roster of who might get there, and there are plenty of names that could potentially emerge, off this team. One of the names you start with is Georgia quarterback JT Daniels. And Terence, the one thing I've said about Daniels is, okay, so if he's going to be a quarterback on the par with what a Trevor Lawrence has been, or what a Justin Fields was for Ohio State, or what a Joe Burrow, who was at LSU in 2019, Mac Jones there as well. The completion percentage looks great. The yards per attempt number looks good. The total passing yards, if you want to project the full season for Daniels on the basis of what he did for 4 games a year ago, that looks really strong there as well if you want to make that projection. The one thing you probably need to see a little bit more from Daniels, I would say, is those big touchdown numbers. These guys I just mentioned before are throwing 40-something touchdowns in a season. Burrow threw 60 for LSU. that finding a way to get to the end zone, to take what the defense is not trying to give to you, that's probably the next threshold for Daniels. Would you agree with that? And how do you evaluate him in comparison to the first-round quarterbacks we've seen here over the course of the last couple of years?
I mean, you just think about those guys from Joe Burrow. So let's just take him as an example, because I think both of their situations are kind of mirroring each other. If Joe Burrow would have came out 2 years ago, he was projected as a fourth, fifth round pick, even though he had all that talent around him, the same talent, and he came back the next year and exploded. So I think J.T. Dane has the talent. I think he has the talent with himself. I think he has the overall talent with his teammates to go in and be a 40-touchdown, 5,000-yard passer. Will we throw it that much? I don't know, but now you got to look at it as a talent evaluator. You have to look at his skill set. Can he make all the throws? Can he process information? I think he can. I think one knock is going to be in today's game in quarterbacks. They want quarterbacks now who can move. I think Mac Jones got knocked a little bit because he wasn't that 4-5 guy that teams are looking for now. So I think JT is probably going to get that same question mark with him next year. Can he move? How athletic is he? But just throwing the football, he really just got to show improvement. He really got to have some of the numbers. Don't have to have the gaudy numbers of Joe Burrow with 60 touchdowns. That's just amazing. But he has to have an eye-popping season to, I guess, garner and warrant a first-round pick, which I think he can.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said. When we talk about the wide receiver spot, especially complicated by the George Pickens injury, the one thing I keep coming back to, Terrence, is these national championship teams have had multiple receivers with the big season. Now, Devontae Smith is a little bit of an outlier because Jalen Waddle eventually got hurt, but really John Mechie's a good receiver too. But the point is, LSU has Jefferson and Chase in 2019. Clemson has T. Higgins and Justin Ross in 2018. Alabama had a whole host of receivers in 2017 that when you look at Georgia here in 2021, it's not just one receiver playing at kind of a George Pickens-like level or a first-round draft pick type level. You really need multiple guys to do that. And there are, I would say, plenty of candidates to do that. We just don't quite know who those names are yet, right?
Right. But I do think that room is very talented. I mean, if you see some of the social media catches these guys made these last few days, you can see the talent is there. And I just think that room is loaded. I think that room, even minus George Pickens, I think is very talented with Justin Robinson, with AD, with Jermaine Burton, with even Dominic Blaylock. I think is once he's healthy, he's another talented receiver. So the lack of talent is definitely not is there in that room. They do have a lot of talent. So I project that those guys going out, staying healthy, JT staying healthy, to go and put up massive numbers. Is it going to be the numbers that those guys put up from Alabama, LSU? Probably not. I don't think we're going to run that type of offense, but they're going to put up eye-popping numbers that all those guys will have 6, 7, or 800 yards amongst themselves, and that will be a good season.
I want to finish with this. I played some audio of your brother before you came on the show when he was on a couple of weeks ago, talking about the depth of the Georgia running backs between Zamir and Cook, the two veterans, and obviously what Kendall Milton has a chance to do. And, of course, Kenny McIntosh when he's back healthy, and Dajon Edwards there as well. And, for some Georgia fans, they don't quite see that same superstar-level player that you once had with the DeAndre Swift or certainly years ago Todd Gurley or Nick Chubb, Sony Michel. But, Terrence, the point I tried to make earlier is that, after Najee Harris freshman year in 2017, I don't know anyone thought he was going to be a first-round pick. He was considering transferring from Alabama. And after Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's sophomore year at LSU in 2018, he hadn't come close to putting up the big numbers that he had put up there in his junior season, and kind of on and on you could go with some of this kind of stuff. And I'm not certainly guaranteeing anything like that's going to happen for any of the Georgia backs here right now. But we have seen guys emerge just in time before, and I think there's still reason to be optimistic about the Georgia running back situation. What do you think?
I think that group is very loaded and talented. So I'm going to give Zamir Wright his flowers right now, because I was a little hard on him last year, not knowing that he was a little banged up. But once I saw him fully healthy, you saw the vision, you saw the explosiveness, you saw the cut. Kendall Milton is the guy that I'm very excited about, because he brings a little little bit of everything, a blend of speed, a blend of power, a blend of being able to catch the ball out the backfield. James Cook bring a different element. Kenny McIntosh bring a different element. So just depending on who's hyped that game, in my opinion, or who brings the better matchup. When you think about 2 years ago when we played Alabama, I think in the SEC championship game, Sony was more effective than Chubb that game because it bring a different type of element to that game. And Chubb downhill running style kind of matched what Alabama was able to stop, but Sony shifting this and him being able to cut and make people miss was more effective against Alabama defense that year. So whatever guy brings the best fit against that opponent is probably going to be the guy that gets the more opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Terrence, great stuff as always. Appreciate you being here. Of course, you're doing great work, as you like to say, in the bubble there, getting that next generation of wide receivers ready to go for their upcoming high school season, of course, college football and everything else beyond that there as well. For people who want to get in touch, how can they find out more about what you're doing?
You can find me on all social media at Terence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
Terrence, great stuff. Thank you for being here, and we will look forward to talking to you next week.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So good stuff there from Terence Edwards, the great former Georgia wide receiver. And, in talking about, JT Daniels as Edwards was, as I said before, Terence does his personal training. He calls it the bubble. That's the facility where he trains in. And think about this for a moment. If you brought JT Daniels into the bubble, just pick any football field you want to, and you bring Joe Burrow into that same thing, I mean, is there a measurable difference between Burrow and Daniels? Now, maybe there is, but when you watch Daniels throw the football, does it look different coming out of his hand than it does Joe Burrow? I mean, I would suggest, as Terrence said, when you want to go back and watch Burrow when he left Ohio State, no one thought that he had the potential that he had. I mean, he was a good quarterback in 2018 and pretty clearly for LSU, giving them some quarterback play, some stability to that position they had not had. But the idea that he would potentially go down as the greatest single-season quarterback in SEC history, no one would have said that in 2018 there either. So what is the future holding for JT Daniels remains to be seen. Is it, as Jason McIntyre said, Fox Sports number 1 overall pick, or as I think it's Todd McShay from ESPN who currently doesn't have him in the first round at all. I mean, there's a wide range of possibilities here, but there's nothing, with the exception of at one point in time an injured knee, but we're now a couple of years removed from that. There's nothing about Daniel's situation from a talent perspective that ought to be holding him back. It really comes down to, can Todd Monken extract the most out of him, and can you build an offense around Daniels here at Georgia that resembles what Mac Jones got to play in last year in Alabama and what Burrow played in the year before that in LSU? We've obviously talked about that a bunch, but that really is what it kind of comes down to with all of that. That is kind of the final piece in all of this for Daniels and his college and NFL future, and obviously for Georgia with its national championship hopes there as well. We're going to roll through our SEC through here in a moment. Before that, though, I do want to honor today's 5-star mom, courtesy of Kroger. As we head towards Mother's Day on Sunday, Kroger has been giving away these 5-star moms here each and every day this week here on DawgNation. And what a fun thing it is for me on DawgNation Daily to be able to celebrate the stories of these mothers and the impact they're making in their families, and also just kind of cool to see some great sports moms there as well who enjoy, shuttling their kids around the games, but also watching the dogs there as well. And a great example of that today, Becky DeArmond is our 5-star mom today, courtesy of Kroger. And what a great picture that is of Becky and her daughters there enjoying some time at a Georgia football game. I'm trying to tell from the periphery what game that is. It's definitely a late season game because you got goats and jackets on. I can't quite tell which game that is, but they're obviously having a really good time there, doing some great things. And talk about a courageous fighter, Becky, 2-time cancer survivor. She's also had to take care of her own father while he's been going while she's been kind of going through her treatment there. She's caretaker for her father there as well. That's just kind of, selfless act she does, taking really good care of her daughters, of course, there as well. Always available for them. She loves Chihuahuas. She loves the Georgia Bulldogs, loves traveling to home and away games. Becky DeArmond is a perfect example of what a Kroger 5-star mom is all about, and certainly thanks to that, and appreciate Jordan DeArmond nominating her mom here there for that as well. So Becky DeArmond is our Kroger 5-star mom for today. We'll have one more of those big winners coming up tomorrow. And of course, you can make your mom feel like a 5-star and make her a big winner this weekend as well when you check out our folks at Kroger Kroger.com/Mother's Day website to go to, find out about the brunch recipes and all the gift cards, greeting cards, all the things to get ready for the big weekend. Kroger.com/Mother's Day. They'll cover you on all of that. All right, here's something really interesting. And this is one of those things that we do every now and then, and I think this is unfair. But listen, in the age we live in, there's no such thing as a local story anymore, and there's no such thing as private comments. So one of the great traditions in college football, now this doesn't happen much anymore, but it used to happen a lot, is the coach kind of speaking in like the rubber chicken dinner type thing, closed door, boosters, fans, things like that. And there's a lot of, big talk that goes on. And it used to be, for coaches, no harm, no foul, because no one really knew what you say in events like this. But now reporters kind of show up and they are there, and some of this stuff kind of goes viral a little bit. So Jimbo Fisher, the latest on something like this. So he's speaking to some fans at a Booster Club event, and then the question that comes up from one of the fans is about Nick Saban retiring and A&M taking advantage of the situation when Nick Saban's no longer at Alabama. And Jimbo Fisher gets a big roar and a cheer from the crowd when he responds to this by saying, we're going to beat his fill in the blank while he's still there. Don't worry, Jimbo Fisher said. Big cheer comes up with all of that. And, of course, there was a local reporter for A&M that kind of captured audio of this, shared it on Twitter. It goes viral after that. Now everybody's talking about it. Lane Kiffin even putting it on Twitter like a few minutes ago. I don't have this tweet to show you, but even Kiffin himself talking about this, about Jimbo Fisher saying he was going to beat Nick Saban's backside while he's still at Alabama. Kiffin says, here we go again, calling out the GOAT in the middle of another championship run. Lane Kiffin says, good luck to Alabama football. That Jimbo Fisher's comment just went on the wall in the weight room there in Tuscaloosa. Now, listen, as I said before, this is Fisher trying to fire up his own fans. I don't know this ought to be treated as, huge bulletin board level material, but Alabama will probably try to use this to its advantage. We'll see if this is remembered and talked about when these two teams get together. For someone like Jimbo Fisher, who's trying to quietly build something at Texas A&M, I'm sure he wishes this probably did not go viral, but it did. I don't think he meant anything, by this. He's just trying to stir up his fans. But this day and age, everything just kind of goes viral when it comes to something like that. By the way, speaking of Nick Saban, Saban was at the Celebrity Pro-Am for the Senior Tour event in Birmingham yesterday and spoke to reporters briefly. And one of the things that came up, his feelings about the new name, image, and likeness laws that are starting to take shape. Of course, Governor Brian Kemp has signed some of that here in Georgia. There was some controversy about what Florida was going to do. They seem to have kind of done an about face on an initial kind of pumping the brakes on the previous news that they had made. Saban weighing in on all of this. I'm going to read you a quote here from Saban. I want you to tell me if you notice what it is that he doesn't say. This is Nick Saban about name, image, likeness. He says, I'm not sure anybody knows for sure the impact of the effect of it because we don't know for sure what the parameters and what the rules are. He says, look, I'm all for the players. This is Nick Saban talking. My biggest concern is how do we manage this? How do we police it? And how do we make sure that it's fair for everybody? That's Nick Saban on the new name, image, and likeness laws. Now, think about the way that Saban talks about everything else in college football. Is Nick Saban ever interested in making things, quote unquote, fair for everybody? But somehow when it comes to name, image, and likeness stuff here, he's worried about the playing field somehow being uneven and unlevel. And obviously what he's concerned there is that some states may be more aggressive with that than what Alabama's going to be. Although based on what I've seen, the Alabama legislature is actually taking a pretty aggressive stance on giving players access to their name, image, likeness revenue right away as opposed to making them wait. But we'll kind of see all that, take shape. I guess what I'm saying is, to me, I read those quotes from Nick Saban as Saban being less than fully enthusiastic about this, as opposed to what somebody might say, which is, hey, we're going to try to enact name, image, likeness laws in our state that give us the best chance to be the most competitive and take advantage of this new opportunity. It almost seems like Saban is kind of tiptoeing into these waters. And maybe Saban's feeling here reflective of the way that a lot of people feel inside college football. But it's been kind of thought of, well, maybe name, image, likeness stuff is going to be a big advantage for the schools to recruit and get better access to players. And some state legislatures seem to think they're giving their favorite schools a chance to do that. But Nick Saban doesn't quite seem to be taking him that way, and I think that's kind of interesting. One final SEC through story, TJ Finley, LSU quarterback, who got a chance to start some games with the Tigers a year ago, but by the end of the year was kind of unseated by Max Johnson. Finley has now entered the transfer portal. This is not a surprise. LSU tried to wage kind of a four-headed monster quarterback competition during the spring, but that kind of stuff never really works out. You see the writing on the wall there. If you're Finley, he's not the quarterback that's in favor right now. It is probably either going to be Johnson or Miles Brennan, who lost part of last season to injury, but now coming back. Looks like it's a little bit of a Johnson-Brennan battle there in Baton Rouge, but not TJ Finley. Finley enters the transfer portal and will make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, stick with me about 1 minute from right now. I've got a really fun reminder of something really cool that's going to happen tomorrow. I'll tell you about that coming up about a minute from now. But before we do that, let me mention this about Georgia on the way out the door here. So Chip Patterson, CBSSports.com, has an updated preseason top 25 on the heels of spring practice. And Georgia now comes in at 5th on this list after being 7 in the previous iteration of this from CBSSports.com. If you care, Georgia ranked behind Ohio State, Oklahoma, Clemson, and the defending national champion Alabama at the top. Now, you may think that 5th is too low for Georgia, and you may laugh at the idea that Georgia was eventually 7th. And I understand all of that, but put that aside for a moment. Here is the thing that stories like this, as insignificant as they might be, here's the thing that they ought to remind us about when it comes to Georgia for this upcoming season. If you want to go back to very near the start of spring practice, when the George Pickens injury first occurred, there were a lot of Georgia fans at the time, and it's easy to understand the emotion of this in that moment, who thought the Georgia season was essentially over. But now you have a guy like Chip Patterson who covers college football closely, knows the Georgia situation well, and he says, even in spite of the George Pickens injury, I still like Georgia at the end of spring better than I did before the start of the spring. And Mark Schlabach said the same thing for ESPN.com. We talked about that yesterday. So don't disregard that too quickly. That for Georgia, sustaining one of the worst injuries she can during a spring practice, and yet the overall feeling about the Dogs after spring by CBS, by ESPN, and a lot of media folks, all in all, is still pretty positive. Okay, so tomorrow, we are going to make a very fun announcement here on this program. We're also going to do it from a very special location, DawgNation Daily on the road tomorrow. That's going to be really cool. A big announcement about a fun event. A lot of folks have been asking, BA, are you going to do any kind of like DawgNation Days of Summer type stuff here this year? Going to have any kind of events? We have not had a public event under the banner of DawgNation since prior to March of last year. Many of you are very well aware of that. That is about to change. Tomorrow, I'm going to tell you all about it. This is going to be a ton of fun. Cannot wait for that. Also, let me invite you to please send your submissions to us here for the Golden Shoe. Hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. Go to, just that's probably the best way to do it all the way around. Do that there. Subscribe to YouTube if you haven't. And, of course, we'll see you tomorrow here on the program. Gator Hater Countdown on the way out the door right here. How about 177 days? That's when Georgia's going to be floored again. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video. Time now for R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Yes, so please, tomorrow, special location for the show. Big announcement about a fun event that we're going to do. Kind of a DawgNation Day of Summer type thing. It's going to be really cool. Really fun stuff. It's going to go down. We'll tell you about it tomorrow, and it goes down a little bit after that. So please, for those of you who've been hoping we could get back together and do something in public again, this is going to be a great chance to do that coming up very soon. All right, let me go over to YouTube first today, and as I said before, rsandrews.com there. If your air conditioning unit is on the verge of breaking down, some of them are, many of you know that your system's kind of past its shelf life. Well, go ahead and see if you can breathe a little life back into that thing by getting it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find them online at rsandrews.com, and they will allow you to do that. All right, over here on YouTube here for a moment. Jim McLaughlin says, I like being ranked 5th in the preseason. A lot of Georgia fans do. They'd rather be 5th than 1st. There is this, Nick Saban pumped this into our brains a couple of years ago, and a lot of us still live with the idea of this, that the rat poison thing is kind of real, and you don't want to be, too susceptible to that. I understand that. Jason Crosby says Pickens will be back for the Florida game. That's kind of a nice deal. If that were to be true, think about this. With an SEC championship and, 3 postseason games, I'm sorry, to get 2 playoff games, 3 postseason games all the way all around. If somebody like that, whether it be, Pickens or whomever, you come back in November, you've still got a lot of football left to play if that's indeed the case. That guy says that Pickens is going to come back and flex in Jacksonville. I'd love to be able to see that. Jay Buchanan says, thanks for being amazing. I appreciate those kind of words. He says, do you know how the ticketing structure will change with things getting back to normal? Are they going to still be in pods? I don't know the answer to that. And I think that there's probably a little bit of a wait and see on some of this. Here's what I kind of see overall, and you tell me if you kind of agree with this. It seems like the college sporting events right now, and I'm just speaking broadly here, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it seems like the college are being a lot more, whether you call it conservative or careful or whatever word you want to use, with the ticketing stuff right now than some of the professional sporting events are. There's a lot of professional sports getting back to full capacity and things like that. And some of these colleges, and frankly, including UGA here, are a little slow to do that. There's a lot of SEC baseball stadiums right now that are a lot more full than Foley Field is, unless Foley's recently made an announcement and a change that I haven't seen. I know that Tim Corbin Vanderbilt just opened it up for full seating there for the Vandy boys. But generally speaking, you've seen, a lot of these colleges a little bit slower to adapt to some of this kind of stuff, in terms of the full stadium. So I think the athletic departments want to be full, and that would mean you don't have to worry about pods or anything like that. You just give out tickets the way that you have before. You distribute them the way that you've done that in the past. But as of right now, I think a lot of these athletic departments are still waiting from the okay from the university that they truly are blessed to be able to do that. And so it seems like we have a little bit of a difference in terms of how the college ticketing is going in comparison to professional sports ticketing, where there's a lot of professional sports out there right now really pushing to get back to full capacity, which I think is in many ways time to do. Some of the colleges are moving a little slower on that. All right, let's see what else. Brandon Griffin planning his trip to Athens for his first UGA football game. Brandon, that's great to hear, and I hope you have a great time. And when you do go to Athens, please make sure you stop by and see us there as well. Let's see what else. DogFan3 asking about the video of Marcus Rosemy-Jack saying, yeah, we talked about that on the show a couple of days ago. We actually showed the video on here. That was great to see. Davis Painter says, how quickly will we see the aftermath of the name, image, and likeness signing? This is one of those things where I still think, even with some of these laws actually being enacted, I still think the specifics in all of this are still not quite well defined. And I think Nick Saban kind of referenced that in some of his comments a moment ago, where I think that right now a lot of colleges are fairly comfortable with the kind of general idea of, hey, come here and cash in on your brand. And we're going to have these companies that help us educate you and inform you on how to do that. But in terms of actually drilling down on how much money you can make and how you actually make that money and what you're allowed to do, are you like me? It just doesn't seem like we get very many specifics on how all that's supposed to go, and that seems to be the way the colleges kind of want it for right now. They want to be seen as trying to be aggressive about this without explaining about just exactly how aggressive they are. At least that's, kind of my mindset on all of that. Let's see what else. Dallas Schwartz says, and good to see Dallas in the comment section, by the way, out there in SoCal, that if Dominic Blaylock is healed up and able to go full speed, he helps fill the gap, but no doubt Pickens will be missed. Yeah, look, Blaylock coming back, Rosemy-Jack coming back, these guys who, suffered pretty serious injuries, you love the idea that they might be able to return. Robert Barnes brings up a pretty good point that, it is probably fair to rank some teams ahead of Georgia for the upcoming season because Georgia did win the East a year ago. And, so the idea that you would have some established doubt by national media, things like that seems all pretty fair all the way around. All right, let's see what else. HR picking stuff, really excited about the upcoming season for JT Daniels. That's great to see. CB talking about Matt Corral. They were actually showing the Ole Miss spring game on the SEC Network a moment ago. I was watching that. He's a good quarterback for sure. Foster Moss giving me some grief for talking about He calls them the Texas instead of A&M. He calls them B and A. That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. All right, let's see what else. Let's go over to Facebook for a moment, see how the folks over there are doing. Hope everybody's doing great today, too, by the way. We'll get ready to roll out of here in just a little bit. Here on the Facebook side of things, Chris Slim White says we're deep at every position. Players just need a chance, and that's nice to think about. Joel Moody says grandkids and got to meet former Kentucky linebacker and NFL first-round pick Jamin Davis this week, home there in Ludowici. Is it Ludowici? Is that how you say that? Ludowici, Georgia, at the Recreation Department. That's a really cool thing, Joel. I'm glad to see that. Jesse Saga says we're finally getting loaded at the defensive line and wide receiver positions. And, yeah, I mean, the defensive line for Georgia I think expects to be very, very deep. And the wide receiver position is kind of coming along there pretty well there, too. John William Adams says the name, image, and likeness, can they tailor the contract by performance or reward-based incentives? So, yeah, I mean, the one thing to be noted here is that the name, image, and likeness stuff is actually not coming from the school itself. So this is more along the line of the endorsement category. To what it kind of reminds me of a little bit is I'm a little bit of a golf guy, and I know many of you probably don't follow the PGA Tour, but one of the things the PGA Tour just announced that it's enacting is what they're going to call like a PIP score. And this is basically going to be a way of rewarding players for their off-course value. Now, there's a specific reason why this is happening in golf, because there had been some talk of starting, you know how like there was this thing in soccer the other day about the new Super League or whatever, and that was going to kind of like take away from like UEFA and stuff like that for those of you that care about international soccer. Well, there was a golf version of that too. It's going to be called like the PGL, and it was potentially going to take players off the PGA Tour. It's going to pay them a ton of money for doing so. And so what the PGA Tour is doing instead is saying, okay, we're going to distribute $40 million to players who deserve it because of their, basically their celebrity status and what they bring to the tour in terms of extra eyeballs. We're going to reward them for that, kind of outside the boundaries of what they make on the course as players. And believe it or not, there are a lot of golfers who, on the basis of on-course earnings alone, are probably actually a little bit underpaid. The difference between the best golfer and the sort of the middle-tier golfer is not as wide as maybe it should be in terms of who actually provides the most value to the PGA Tour. So the Tour is trying to rectify that by kind of pumping $40 million into the player economy. That's a little bit like what name, image, likeness is kind of supposed to be of, like Charles Barkley the other day talked about, what do you do about the offensive linemen who, they're not going to be doing name, image, and likeness stuff, but that's just kind of the way that sports works, right? I mean, we know that offensive linemen are just as important to winning as anything is, but in terms of who actually gets the 200,000 Instagram followers, sometimes that's not a lineman who's going to be doing that. And that's just kind of the blessing of living in a free society to a certain extent, that certain things just kind of work out a little bit different for some positions in comparison to others. And so name, image, and likeness is supposed to be one of those things that kind of rewards certain players whose celebrity status might be a little higher than others. However, here's like the one tiny caveat I'll offer, then we'll kind of get back to the topic at hand. I think a lot of people seem to think that the easiest way for people to cash in on their name, image, and likeness, for athletes to be able to do that, is through like influencer, messages and things like that. That's a little bit harder of a job than some people think it is. That's not just free money. There's a certain way in which you have to deliver content, on these social media platforms, even if you have a bunch of followers, to really make the value what it's supposed to be for some of these, influencer things and things like that. That's not as easy as some of these, Instagram models make it look. But nonetheless, Phil Rogers talking a little Don Drysdale and Hank Aaron. You love to see that. That's good stuff. Ooh, Marvin Roach asked a great question. Do you think that Darnell Washington could be an 800-yard catching tight end this year? That seems like a lot, but tell me, Marvin, and maybe what are some decent benchmarks for like tight ends in the SEC? Let's look at this. Let's go back to 2019 for a second, because that was a full season. So let's go to the SEC. Let's go to 2019. Let's go to receiving yards. So in 2019, Kyle Pitts had 649 receiving yards in a full season there. What did Pitts have this past year? So this past year, where is Pitts on this list? Why am I not seeing Pitts here right now? Hold on. I know this is riveting, y'all. I'm sorry. All right, so this past year, why is he not showing up? Something's weird about that. But if you want to go back 2019, full season, the top tight end in the SEC then was Kyle Pitts at 649 yards. I don't know why he wasn't showing up for 2020, but showing up there with 649 yards on 54 catches. So obviously Pitts had the huge year for Florida a year ago, but that kind of shows you that in normal years, you don't see tight ends show up that way near the top. Thaddeus Moss, of course, you all know him. He had 570 for LSU. He shared a lot of balls that year, a lot of guys there. Jaden Weinermeyer for Texas A&M had 447. He was inside the top 30 in receiving. So most of the time, it's hard for a tight end to be near the top of his team's kind of receiving pecking order there. Is Washington talented enough where he might have a chance to do that? And is the situation at receiver open enough where Washington could potentially take advantage of that? We shall see about that. 800 seems like a lot, but let me tell you something. If that were the case, then that Georgia offense is probably pretty potent. Joel Moody says it would be amazing if Washington get to 500 this year. Yeah, I mean, maybe 600 might be, Ben Green says how about 770? Maybe that's the case there as well. But look, here's the thing is that I think in a lot of cases, if you're going to go to about progressions and reads and things like that, I think a lot of times Georgia tight ends in the past have been not one of those first or second progressions for a quarterback. They've been more along the lines of, as Rick Gilbert once famously said, kind of stick routes. 5 yards, turn around, you just kind of dump it off right there. Are they going to give, and it seems like on the basis of the Cincinnati game and the Missouri game, this is kind of true, but are they going to give Darnell more interesting routes to run? Are they going to make him more of a focal point of someone that you're actually trying to hit as kind of a primary target on a passing play or something like that? And it seems like there's some evidence to believe that that might be the case. Oh, and by the way, Ben Green also reminds us that that after the Lewis Scene hit, Kyle Pitts missed some time there for Florida, so that may be why he wasn't showing up near the top of that list from a year ago, and that's a really good point. How quickly you forget, by the way, I guess, talking about myself there on that. All right, one or two more, we're going to get ready to go. Matt Rukavina reminds us of something that it wasn't that long ago that Georgia was kind of a tight end U, right? Our buddy Troy Sadowski, who shows up in our Facebook comment section a lot, he was an All-American there in '88. After that, you kind of get into y'all remember Shannon Mitchell from Alcoa, Tennessee? Shannon was a really good player. I've never been a huge video game guy, but a video game I used to love was, I believe it was the first edition of the EA Sports college football game, and I think it came out in 1993. For the Sega Genesis, I had this. And it was like the 92 Georgia team was the Georgia team on there. And it's like you have Zaire at quarterback and Garrison Hurst at running back and Andre Hastings opposite receiver. And you had Shannon Mitchell there as the tight end for that team. Big weapon. That was a fun video game to play back when we were talking about like 16-bit graphics. This was not, big time graphic achievements, but a pretty good game to play. And Mitchell, and then you roll right into Randy McMichael, and you get into the Leonard Popes, and I'm even leaving a bunch of guys out here and talking about, some of these big names. Obviously, Orson Charles, and Georgia's had a lot of very impressive tight ends over the years, and seeing that be a big part of the formula for UGA, I think a lot of folks would like to see that there as well. All right, we're going to get ready to go. One or two more. That guy. I'm a sucker for a good pun, and that guy gave you a good one right there. G. Grace Bama Boy stirring up trouble as per usual. Mike D says Washington won't get to 500 yards. It'd be awesome to see, but we rotate too much instead of leaving the best on the field. I wonder, though, Mike. I mean, I understand what you're saying. Georgia does rotate a lot, and I would say there are a lot of tight ends for Georgia who are deserving to play. But And when you play two tight ends, that's obviously one receiver you're not playing there as well. However, last year we saw Georgia rotate less the receiver position than it has before. In other words, if Georgia feels like it's got clear delineations, especially under Todd Monken, maybe they're not looking to rotate quite as much. And so maybe Washington is of a stature now as a prospect. Well, all of a sudden, they're not looking to rotate quite as much as they once did. It's at least worth paying attention to. All right. Robert Barnes, going back to the days of Clarence Kay, by the way, who played with John Elway in Denver. Part of the Super Bowl team there. Part of that lineage of Georgia having a Super Bowl player for like a million years in a row. Clarence Kay would have at one point in time contributed to that. Stephen Wainwright wants to see him feed Big O the ball, especially near the red zone. Yeah. That's what we said about Daniels. You know, one of the great measurements of, as a quarterback, are you capable of not just taking what the defense gives you, but also taking what the defense trying not to give you? Are you throwing touchdowns? And in the red zone, perfect example of this. Like, one of the things I think I would say I've learned more about football, or maybe just grown to appreciate more about football, is as you get towards the red zone, it is harder to score, right? You know, sometimes, you know, the play call from the 50-yard line just gives you more opportunities and more options because of the huge level of the field that must be covered. As you get closer in some ways, the job of the defense just gets a little bit easier. So what do you do there when the defense doesn't have to be worried about getting beat over the top? Well, a guy like Darnell Washington becomes something you can do there, and striking the ball inside to him all of a sudden becomes a nice little recipe there. I think that's really interesting. Nature Gator says that Pitts had 770 yards in 7 games. Boy, that is a huge, my gosh, that is quite a stat line. That is quite a stat line. All right. Let us see how we go here. All right. One more on Facebook, then we're going. Dustin Williams says, any updates on Rick Gilbert? Now, at this point in time, my expectation is that Gilbert just probably ends up back at LSU. My guess is he probably plays for them this year. That's kind of my best guess on that, Dustin. Joe Moody says that one drive when Nauta caught like 4 consecutive balls. Yeah, that's going into the half against Florida in 2018, right, where they just kept feeding him over and over and over again. Georgia's playing this fast, hurry-up, no-huddle offense. Nauta's just like gashing Florida. It's like I could stand to see a little bit more of this in my life. Of course, I understand kind of, you know, why Kirby didn't love the idea of doing that too much. You tire out your offensive line a little bit, I guess. But when Georgia did do that, that stuff had a tendency to work, especially when you kind of find that honey hole with Nauta like that. That was pretty fun to be able to see. All right, we are going to get ready to go. Y'all make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. They'll do all that for you. Also, let us get ready to check out the AJC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, online at ajc.com. Always a bunch of stuff going on around the world here, including how the coronavirus vaccine is rolling out right now and kind of what folks feel about that. You can read about that. And I guess Grady High School getting a name change. I guess that's actually happening. Braves getting ready to come back to Truist Park for the weekend. Big month of May coming up for them. Of course, wrapping up what happened for them on the road trip. You can read about that there. And really good new restaurant news there, too. So all kinds of fun stuff all the way around. Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Find them online at ajc.com. Thanks for being here for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We will look forward to seeing all of you again tomorrow. We'll talk to you soon, everybody.